The mystery of the Antithyr. The remains of an old shipwreck were discovered in 1901 by sponge divers off the Greek island of Antithyr. Amidst the corroded statues and amphorae, there was an odd lump of wood and bronze that had been overlooked for decades, until a closer look showed dozens of ingeniously interconnected gears buried inside a corroded casing. Nothing that had ever been recovered from the old world was like what they had discovered. The antithesis mechanism was invented. Between 150 and 100 BCE, it is frequently said to as the first analog computer in history. Constructed in the late Hellenistic era, it was able to monitor the motions of celestial bodies, predict eclipses, and even explain the moon's erratic orbit. For ages, we believed that medieval Europe was the first time that such gear-based intricacy appeared. Here, however, evidence of the ancient Greeks' mechanical prowess and philosophical brilliance emerged from a shipwreck off the coast of Ion. The teeth of its gears were finer than those of a wristwatch. Additionally, its mathematical accuracy was on par with clockwork from the 18th century. It was calibrated, not merely constructed. Generations of technical knowledge have been passed down, honed, and polished at every stage of its construction. Not only what it did, but also why it is so perplexing. It's that we only discovered one. There are no surviving manuals, no production lineage, and no obvious workshop. According to some academics, the expertise might have perished with a single craftsman, who may have been associated with Archimedes or the Hipparchus school. Others hypothesize that this gadget was just one of many that were lost to time and the tides, possibly typical in affluent Greek homes. A more bizarre fringe hypothesis suggests that the device was intended for theater rather than just science, possibly as an elite toy to show affluent guests that the cosmos was ordered. The enigma lies in that we still don't know, despite the use of 3D modeling and contemporary CT scans, why it was there at all. Experts continue to argue about whether the Antithyr device is an impossible one-off by a single genius, or the pinnacle of a sophisticated but vanished technological legacy. In any case, it compels us to re-evaluate our presumptions. The course of history could not be linear. Sometimes we no longer turn the gears of the past. Egyptian blues, power. There was a tint that seemed to defy time itself long before chemistry had names or periodic tables. It initially appeared approximately 2600 BCE and is now known as Egyptian blue, extensively used on ceramics, frescoes, and statues. At first view, it appears to be a stunning azure that was used to embellish the robes of royalty and the skin of gods. However, behind the surface is a scientific mystery that continues to fascinate contemporary laboratories. Egyptian blue is more than just a coloring. It lights under infrared light using luminescence, a near-infrared emission that scientists only started to take seriously in the 21st century, rather than reflected light. For calcium, copper, silicate, the mineral itself, to develop properly, it must be processed at high temperatures for an extended period of time, between 800 and 1000. To put it another way, it wasn't discovered, it was designed. This wasn't a pleasant accident. Its deliberate creation spanning dynasties suggests a highly developed knowledge of color permanence, mineral supply, and heat management. Perhaps it is not surprising that a culture that has created a pigment that is resistant to fading has produced colossal construction that has endured for millennia. What puzzles us, though, is how consistently it is produced throughout time and space. How did craftspeople preserve such purity without digital thermometers or mineral spectroscopy? Although its chemical formula is universally accepted by academics, nothing is known about how and why it was employed. Why does this hue appear in places as far as Mesopotamia, Greece, and possibly Gaul in addition to Egypt? Some fringe researchers hypothesize that it served a use beyond decoration, possibly in early light absorption or temperature management, given its infrared properties. Although these statements defy the available data, it makes sense to be curious. Why make something so sophisticated? Then he let the information dwindle. The recipe was vanished by the end of the Roman Empire. It just disappeared from the world's artistic lexicon. Its durability and radiance were absent from medieval pigments. Reproducing it at the same level of purity is still challenging, costly, and rarely done outside of academic contexts. Despite contemporary manufacturing, whether Egyptian blue was a chance discovery, whose secrets were never widely disseminated, or the result of a lost chemical legacy passed down in guarded artisan guilds, is still up for debate among academics. In any case, we're left gazing into its light and wondering how something so ancient can still be more brilliant than what we create now. The lost batteries of Baghdad. Amidst clay pots and bronze relics in the National Museum of Iraq's basement, there is a jar that could potentially hold the answer to one of the most bizarre ancient mysteries. At first look, it appears to be a modest ceramic container with an asphalt-sealed copper cylinder inside. However, there is an iron rod inside. That copper tube, when originally explored in the 1930s, it defied straightforward classification. What was it? A receptacle, a ceremonial item, or something far more sophisticated? It is now frequently referred to as the Baghdad battery. It casts doubt on the exact chronology of electrical discovery and is estimated to have occurred between 200 BCE and 200 CE. A little but detectable electrical current was created when replicas were constructed and filled with acidic materials like vinegar or lemon juice. This was sufficient to power a tiny light bulb or provide a tingling sensation on the skin. That straightforward protest sparked a discussion that hasn't stopped since. The battery is typically approached cautiously by mainstream archaeology. There is no concrete proof that the ancients were aware of or intended for the components to produce electricity. No conductors, no copper wires, and no overt indications of usage. Nevertheless, there is an unnerving prospect because the materials and their arrangement are unquestionably functional. Either we're misinterpreting something much odd, or these were simple galvanic cells utilized for some unidentified function. According to others, the devices were employed in electroplating, which involves utilizing an electric charge to put thin metal films onto jewelry. Others assert that they performed an actual shock as part of religious rites in order to evoke terror or amazement, noting that ancient cultures, ranging from the Greeks to the Chinese, experimented with electric fish and their tingling effects on human diseases. Some fringe voices even allude to medical implications. The hush surrounding them is very unsettling. Where are the other jars if these were commonplace tools? There have only been a few discovered, and none of them have direct usage records. There aren't any old books about electricity or circuit. It's illuminating yet contextless, like discovering a matchbook in a prehistoric cave. The question of whether the Baghdad batteries were intentional attempts to capture electrical energy, or if they were just misinterpreted storage devices with strange materials that just so happened to fit with contemporary science, is still up for dispute. Precise in stone, they are still remnants of a world that may have known more than we can ever comprehend. just enough to haunt the edges of what we refer to as impossible. Puma Punku, a vista so strange that it nearly seems out of place on Earth, can be found high in the Bolivian Andes, more than 12,000 feet above sea level. The ancient Tiwanaku complex's Puma Punku isn't dazzling with towering pyramids or elaborate carvings. Rather, it confuses geometry with enormous slabs of stone that are cut with such eerie accuracy that engineers today still squint in shock. Some of the stones in Pumapunku are over 100 tons in weight and are carved from red sandstone and andesite, which are extremely challenging to work with, even with diamond-tipped tools today. However, these blocks are notched into shapes that imply modular construction, sliced with crisp, smooth edges, and drilled with consistent holes. One of the most famous examples is a set of nearly similar H-shaped stones that appear to have been mass-produced over 1,000 years ago, between 500 and 600 CE, rather than in a factory. According to mainstream archaeology, the Tiwanaku pre-Incan society that thrived for centuries is responsible for the construction of Pumapunku. Here's the catch though. No written language, architectural blueprints, or thorough documentation of tools or techniques were left behind by the Tiwanaku. Without iron, wheels, or draft animals, how did they mine, move, and shape these enormous blocks? It would be a logistical challenge to move a 100-ton stone across uneven ground even now. However, some of these blocks were carried from quarries that were almost 60 miles distant, and their joints were so tight that not even a razor blade could pass through them. Was it sight alone that leveled them, or was there another mechanism at work? The dubious theory put forth by some researchers that the stones were softened with plant-based compounds has garnered interest in fringe areas but has not been proved. Others proposed decades of use of crude copper tools and abrasives. Even that sounds like a remarkable time and effort commitment. Without any indications of mistakes, test cuts, or abandoned prototypes, especially, the work is purposeful, mathematically sound, yet oddly contemporary. According to one wild notion, Pumapunku was an ancient landing pad whose layout was intended for a purpose other than human transportation. Although these statements are rightfully condemned for being unsupported by facts, they continue in part because the true rationale is still a mystery. Whether Pumapunku is the natural pinnacle of Stone Age engineering or the remains of a vanished technique that we haven't yet rediscovered is still up for debate among academics. In any event, it contradicts what we believe ancient societies were capable of. Even though they lacked electricity and steel, they had the foresight and resources to turn the impossibly difficult into reality. The water puzzle of Indies. The Indies River Valley was home to a thriving society that subtly perfected the skill of water long before Greece envisioned democracy or Rome built aqueducts. The cities of the Indies Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo Daro, and Dovira were not only populated between approximately 2600 and 900 BCE, they were prearranged, arranged in tidy grids with uniform weights, broad avenues, and brick-paved roadways. Most contemporary urban planners would be envious of the civic vision these communities shown. What still amazes us, though, is what was hidden beneath the surface. The inhabitants of the Indies Valley created sophisticated drainage systems that included covered conduits, sediment traps, and brick-lined sewers. Bathrooms in certain houses emptied into central sewers that connected to community treatment facilities. Almost every home, regardless of wealth, had a toilet of some kind and running water. This was not a luxury. It was a social contract made of clay, and it was conventional. This water engineering is remarkable since it appears to lack a clear precedent, an older tradition to draw from, system explanation, inscriptions, and fluid dynamics treatises. Nevertheless, it was successful. Rainwater was gathered, kept, and dispersed. Contamination-free waste management was practiced. After almost 4,000 years, Mohenjo-daro's huge bath, which is bitumen waterproofed and precisely sloped, continues to withstand deterioration. This is interpreted by mainstream archaeology as proof of a highly structured civil administration, possibly even the first municipal government. We still don't know all the details, though. We don't know how standards were applied over such a large area or how decisions were reached. There are just cities that functioned quietly and effectively. There are no palaces, royal tombs, or ostentatious displays of authority. Sometimes, fringe interpretations go beyond far, implying Mesopotamian influence or even forgotten alien technologies. Others question whether the Indus Valley evolved a peaceful technocratic society based more on water control than military force, pointing to the total lack of evident rulers or weapons. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Around 1900 BCE, the cities started to deteriorate. The water systems deteriorated. Whether it was due to geological movements, river migration, or climate change, the disappearance of such complex infrastructure is still one of archaeology's biggest mysteries. Whether the Indus water systems sprang from a brilliant centralized engineering tradition lost to history or from gradual trial and error is still up for debate among academics. In any case, what is left beneath the surface is a sort of whisper of a civilization that, using water as its guide, silently and anonymously solved issues that still plague us now. The secret recipe for Roman concrete, with its walls and breakwaters, remaining mostly intact after more than 2,000 years. Old Roman harbors continue to obstinately cling to the sea along the Mediterranean coasts. In contrast, salt water, time, and the environment can cause modern concrete to deteriorate over the course of decades. How, therefore, did the Romans create something more robust, durable, and, in many respects, better than what we use today? Their concrete holds the key. In addition to hardening over time, opus caementium, a mixture of lime, volcanic ash, and seawater, seemed to get stronger when buried. Marine formations at locations like Porus Cassinus and the Bay of Naples exhibit evidence of silt, with fissures that over centuries filled in with crystalline growths. Though they might not have fully comprehended the chemistry, Roman engineers were aware of the outcomes. They left behind man-made rocks that have adapted to their and are resistant to deterioration. This was no accident. The significance of using volcanic ash from particular areas, such as Potsui near Naples, was thoroughly explained by the Roman architect Vitruvius in his writings from the 1st century BCE. A unique chemical reaction was produced when the ash and salt water interacted. The gradual development of aluminous tobomorite, a mineral that strengthened the concrete. However, this knowledge disappeared when Rome fell. Middle Ages builders did not carry on the custom. Brick, wood, or more recent forms of mortar were preferred by Renaissance architects. Portland cement did not become the standard until the 20th century. Additionally, it is quick and inexpensive, but it doesn't last as long as the Roman blend. Ironically, we might have lost how to create long-lasting objects in our quest for advancement. This gap has been exploited by fringe theorists who assert that the Romans possessed proprietary formulas that were either transmitted orally or protected by prestigious guilds. Although there isn't much actual proof, one story even claims that Roman concrete contained unusual additives like goat milk or blood to help cure it. However, the endurance of these legends demonstrates how miraculous their engineering appears to be from a contemporary perspective. The fact that the Romans employed several concrete mixtures for various constructions is particularly peculiar. In contrast to domes or aqueducts, underwater structures were blended differently. This suggests a deep comprehension of material characteristics that goes well beyond a one-size-fits-all strategy. Whether the Roman mastery of concrete was the result of deliberate experimentation or a fortunate accident that exceeded theoretical understanding is still up for dispute among academics. In any case, the proof is found on walls, temples, and harbors that stand the test of time, whispering to us that we constructed them to last. Viking navigation has always been awe-inspiring because, to the Icelandic sunstone compass, centuries before compasses were invented in Europe, how could sailors traverse immense oceans from frigid, fog-bound shores? The question hovered over their sagas like a mist for decades. Then came the murmurs of a crystal, known only as the sunstone in Icelandic lore and medieval literature. One chronicle from the 13th century claims that it enabled mariners to determine the sun's location even when it was obscured by clouds or was over the horizon. Perhaps a lost navigation instrument unlike any other, or perhaps a lyrical exaggeration. That story has been taken seriously by scientists in recent decades, and astonishingly, they have discovered a candidate. Light can be polarized by the optical characteristics of the translucent K-light, known as Iceland spar. Even diffuse sunshine becomes polarized in patterns that correspond to the position of the sun when it is properly rotated. Experiments have demonstrated that, with a little practice, one can use this stone to locate the sun with very high precision, even in cloudy or twilight situations. It's intriguing just that. It implies that the Vikings might have had an innate technology that was straightforward, robust, and extremely intelligent. Here's the mystery though. There has never been a verified sunstone discovered in a Viking shipwreck or tomb. The concept is still alluring but unattainable. Long after the Viking era, a lone Iceland spar was found on a shipwreck from the 16th century close to Olden. It's still unclear if that was a coincidence or proof of continuity. Historians in the mainstream are nevertheless warily interested. According to the Sunstone hypothesis, Vikings traveled across the hazy North Atlantic, using solar cues to time their journey, and navigated with remarkable accuracy. It's strange, then, that such a potent instrument would leave behind nothing except a narrative and the faint outline of a crystalline road through the clouds. No formal legacy, no blueprints, and no uniform nomenclature. There are many fringe theories. According to others, only expert navigators who were pledged to secret were able to access the sunstone. Others envision the stone serving as a talisman and compass in a mystical or spiritual capacity. According to some retellings of the story, the stone speaks to the sun rather than merely finding it. Whether the sunstone was an actual tool, a poetic metaphor, or something else entirely is still up for debate among academics. But since it appeals to a timeless reality, the idea endures. Even in situations where the sky provides no hints, humans have always managed to find their way. In addition to being clever, the Vikings' usage of such a technology was centuries ahead of its time. Technology for sound at Shavandawanta, a temple unlike any other, can be found high in the Peruvian Andes, where the air becomes thinner and the mountains encroach. Constructed more than 3,000 years ago, Shavandawanta served as the religious center of an enigmatic pre-Incan society. Its carvings and sculptures, however, were not its most enduring strength. The air itself concealed it. This was a place where sound was actually, rather than figuratively, engineered. The temple is a maze of ventilation shafts and narrow stone passageways. Its acoustics seem eerily intentional, nevertheless. Priests or shamans probably played enormous conch shell trumpets, called patutas, within, which caused low-frequency roars to reverberate through the tunnels. These sounds bounced around the chambers, giving the impression of movement, confusion, and even voice-like phenomena, according to archaeologists and acoustic engineers who have examined the site. According to all accounts, it was a sensory experience designed to control, perplex, and amaze. Chavinduanto was a ceremonial structure that may have been intended to stage life-changing religious experiences, according to mainstream researchers. Here's what makes it unique, though. The use of sound to influence human psychology. Chest vibrations are caused by specific frequencies. Others use instinctive responses, trance, flight, and fight. This appears to have been instinctively grasped by the Chavin people. You experienced the ceremony on a deep level, not just hearing it. These effects have been reproduced by contemporary studies. In one study, sound sensors and microphones were positioned throughout the temple's galleries. The findings demonstrated intentional frequency tuning, with some sounds being more effective than others at passing through stone corridors. This was more than just ingenious. It was a sort of ancient sonic architecture meant to inspire awe, rather than clarity. As usual, fringe interpretations go farther. The temple was a mind-control device, according to some. According to some, it worked similarly to an antiquated sound weapon that used resonance to elicit fear, compliance, or even hallucinations. Such assertions raise a deeper question, even when they go against the data. How was this level of auditory manipulation achieved by a culture without a written language? Then there's the literal underground. Drainage canals, which resemble organ pipes and are made to roar during torrential rains, are located beneath the temple. Imagine walking through a completely black maze, while guttural horns groan through the walls and thunder roars beneath your boots. This was not merely a custom, it was drama, technology, and immersion. Whether Chavin's sound design was the result of empirical trial and error, or a forgotten tradition of acoustic engineering that only initiates knew about, is still up for contention among academics. However, one thing is evident. A mountain temple transformed sound into power thousands of years before microphones, amplifiers, or concert halls, and its echoes were preserved in stone for us to hear. In conclusion, they have been buried in temples, spread over deserts, sunken in seas, and spanning continents and millennia. The same eerie truth is whispered by these fragments. It wasn't always primitive in the past. From ancient Greek gearwork to the carefully planned acoustics of Andean temples, humanity has frequently had flashes of genius before forgetting them. These obsolete technologies are more than simply oddities. They provide insights into societies that had a distinct perspective on nature and viewed materials as meaning-making tools rather than merely resources. Some used color, music, or salt water, while others worked with stone. They are united not only by technical proficiency, but also by purpose. These things were created by someone with intention, knowledge, and care. We are now left to attempt to reverse engineer the why as well as the how. Many of these mysteries are still up for debate. In science, were they solitary inventions, fortuitous discoveries, or shards of larger customs that were never documented? Perhaps the truth is more unsettling. The development isn't linear. We occasionally lose things that were formerly common. Sometimes, we are in awe of things that our forefathers just knew. Maybe that's the true enigma. We rediscover ourselves by rediscovering these technologies, not because they were lost,